The night was restless. Wind tore through the shattered ruins of Cayenne, carrying whispers of a war that had stretched too long. Somewhere in the darkness, Evelyn crouched beneath a collapsed wall, her breath fogging in the cold air. The small transmitter in her hand flickered, a pulse of light in a sea of shadow. She was alone now. Her partner, Claire, had been taken 2 nights ago. The Gestapo had moved faster than anyone expected. She'd been sending coded messages for 48 hours straight, changing positions every hour, her nerves burning with exhaustion. Each click of the key was a heartbeat, each pause a prayer. Somewhere across the channel, a British operator would be listening, decoding her words, enemy troop movements, rail lines, ammunition depots. All she could do was hope someone heard her before they found her. In the old farmhouse outside Lyon, another woman moved through the silence. Her name was Margaret. Once a history teacher in Boston, now she was a ghost in occupied France. Her mission was simple: destroy a communications tower before the Allied invasion began. Simple, they had said, but nothing in this war was simple anymore. The resistance network had been fractured. Friends were missing, radios silent, safe houses burned to the ground. Yet she went on. That night, dressed in a nurse's uniform, she walked straight into the German compound, a basket of supplies on her arm and a quiet smile on her face. No one looked twice. No one saw the detonator hidden beneath the bread. Evelyn finally made it to the rendezvous point. The church bell was cracked, half the roof gone. Inside, candlelight flickered against the stone. 2 men from the Maquis waited, young, trembling, armed with old rifles. They said the Allies were close now, days away. She handed them the coordinates she'd risked everything to gather. When she turned to leave, one of them stopped her. "If they catch you," he whispered, "say nothing." She smiled faintly. That's the easy part. 2 days later, she was captured. The German patrol had intercepted her near Saint-Étienne. The transmitter was found hidden beneath her coat, the codebook still damp from rain. They took her to Fresnes prison near Paris, the place spies went when their stories were nearly over. The corridors smelled of rust and fear. Inside the cell, she found a message scratched into the wall. A single word: courage. She traced it with her fingers and closed her eyes. Somewhere out there, Margaret was still alive, still fighting. That thought kept her breathing. Margaret's explosion tore through the night sky 3 days later. The tower fell, communications went dark, and chaos spread through the German ranks. She made it out of the compound, limping through the trees as sirens screamed behind her. For 2 days she hid in barns, feeding on rainwater and bread crusts, but word came through the resistance: Evelyn had been taken. She didn't hesitate. Against orders, she made her way toward Paris, blending into convoys and freight trains, her papers forged and face hollowed by hunger. The city was a coffin under curfew. Every sound felt like a trap. Every face could be a spy. At Fresnes, Evelyn endured the days by reciting songs in her mind, tunes from back home, faint echoes of laughter by the Hudson River. The interrogations were endless. The man who questioned her was polite, almost gentle. He offered her cigarettes, coffee, even warmth. But she said nothing, not one word. After the 3rd session, they stopped asking. They knew she would never break. By the summer of 1944, the Allies had landed. The tide had turned, but in occupied Paris, the shadows still owned the night. Margaret reached the edge of the city as gunfire echoed in the distance. Liberation was coming, but she had one task left. A contact led her to a resistance safe house near Montparnasse. Inside, an old woman handed her a folded note. Just 2 lines written in pencil. Evelyn alive. Prison transfer scheduled. Tomorrow. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, disguised as a Red Cross courier, Margaret followed the convoy that carried prisoners from Frezin to the railway yard. The air smelled of diesel and smoke. When the guards stopped for inspection, she stepped forward, clipboard in hand, eyes steady. "Medical supplies," she said in fluent French. The officer nodded. In that fleeting moment, her eyes found Evelyn's through the truck's slats. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Margaret slipped the guard a forged pass and a bottle of brandy, enough to buy 20 minutes. When the train started moving, she was already ahead, waiting by the bridge outside the city. The truck approached. One sharp whistle. A single explosion ripped through the tracks. Chaos, gunfire, screams. Evelyn crawled free through the smoke, blood on her hands, air burning her lungs. Margaret was there, dragging her toward the trees. They made it as far as the river before the searchlights found them. Bullets splintered the water. Margaret shoved Evelyn into the reeds, shouting for her to go. She turned back, gun in hand, to hold off the soldiers. That was the last time Evelyn saw her alive. When Paris was liberated weeks later, Evelyn walked through streets lined with cheering crowds, bells ringing for freedom. But in her heart, there was silence. The war was ending, but something inside her would never leave that night behind. After the war, she returned to America. She lived quietly, never telling anyone the full story. When she was finally honored by the OSS decades later, she said only one thing to the reporters waiting outside. "We did what needed to be done, and we never stopped believing." Years later, historians uncovered Margaret's name on a forgotten list. Presumed killed in action, France, 1944. But Evelyn never called her dead. She kept a photograph of them together, smiling before their first mission, tucked inside a locket she wore for the rest of her life. Sometimes she'd touch it gently and whisper, "We made them believe. We made them see." Because that's what the Resistance Sisters did. They became the invisible force that no one expected. They were teachers, nurses, secretaries, women who turned the tide of a world at war. They carried radios in suitcases, messages in lipstick tubes, and courage in silence. They crossed mountains, faced torture, and vanished into history with nothing but code names to remember them by. The men they worked beside said they were ghosts, always appearing where hope had nearly died, always vanishing before dawn. The Germans never understood how entire networks could crumble overnight, how convoys were ambushed in the right place every time. They never realized it was often a woman who passed them on the street, smiling softly as she carried their secrets in her pocket. And maybe that's the true story of war. Not just the battles, but the quiet defiance of those who refused to be seen, yet changed everything. When Evelyn died in 1993, a small envelope was found in her desk. Inside was a note written in faded ink. "For Margaret, we finished the mission."
The war had swallowed Europe whole. Cities burned, families vanished, and silence replaced laughter in the streets of Paris, Warsaw, and Vienna. Beneath the ruins, whispers moved like ghosts. Coded messages, secret signals, and false identities. Among those whispers were the names of women the world would never forget, though history tried to. They were Americans who volunteered for missions behind enemy lines, women who traded comfort for chaos, safety for shadows. They called them many things: agents, couriers, saboteurs. But to the men they helped, they were simply angels of the resistance. It began quietly, far from the front lines. In Washington, D.C., inside a nondescript building without a nameplate, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, was recruiting. They wanted the invisible, the underestimated, and the brave. Soldiers were easy to find. Spies were not. And so they turned to women. Teachers, secretaries, nurses, Translators. Ordinary American women who spoke French, German, or Italian and could pass unnoticed through the chaos of occupied Europe. One of them was Claire Donovan, a New York journalist fluent in French. When war came, she traded her pen for a codebook. Another was Evelyn Ross, a nurse from Chicago who had seen too much blood and wanted to stop the bleeding in her own way. And then there was Alice Munro, a college student, barely 23, who lied about her age to join the OSS. They were trained not as soldiers, but as shadows. Training was brutal and secret. In the woods of Virginia, they learned to shoot, to fight, to sabotage railways, and to resist interrogation. They were taught to hide microfilm inside buttons, how to encode messages in laundry lists, and how to change identities with a forged passport and a steady voice. They were warned never to trust anyone completely, not even each other. Every day, instructors reminded them, if captured, you do not exist. When the day of departure came, the air was heavy with silence. Their missions would take them into the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe, into cities crawling with German patrols, where a single mistake could mean torture or execution. Each woman carried a cyanide pill hidden in her clothes, a grim reminder of what would happen if the enemy caught them alive. Claire was dropped into France by night, her parachute barely visible against the clouds. The landing was rough, and for a moment she lay still in the grass, listening for dogs or footsteps. When none came, she buried her chute and moved toward the flickering light in the distance, a farmhouse safe house operated by the French resistance. Inside, men and women whispered plans over maps and candles. When they saw her, they did not see a journalist. They saw hope, an American who had come to help them fight. Evelyn's mission was different. She was sent into Belgium as a Red Cross nurse, a perfect cover. Her task was to carry coded reports about German troop movements hidden in medical supplies. Each trip to a hospital was a walk through danger. Gestapo officers inspected trains, searched bags, and questioned passengers. She learned to smile calmly, even when her hands trembled. Once, a German officer asked for her papers. She handed them over, heartbeats steady, knowing that if he found the envelope sewn inside her skirt, she would not see another sunrise. But he didn't. He smiled politely, stamped her pass, and moved on. Alice was sent to Paris under the alias Marie Formier. Her mission was to establish communication lines between underground resistance cells and Allied command in London. She worked from a bakery on Rue Saint-Denis, where the smell of bread hid the tension in the air. Beneath the counter, she kept a shortwave radio. Each night, after curfew, she climbed to the attic, adjusted the frequency, and sent out coded messages. Troop movements, railway schedules, reports of German supply routes. Her voice, soft and steady, crossed the channel like a ghost. She signed each transmission the same way, from Marie, with courage. The women knew their work could turn deadly in an instant. They lived in constant fear of betrayal, by a neighbor, a lover, even a comrade turned informant. The Gestapo hunted spies ruthlessly. Posters appeared on walls warning of female agents working with the enemy. One night, Claire narrowly escaped capture when her contact was arrested. She fled through alleyways, chased by boots echoing off the cobblestones, until she found refuge in a church crypt. There, surrounded by silence and dust, she cried for the first time since arriving in France. But even in tears, she refused to stop. The next morning, she was back at work, her face hidden beneath a scarf, carrying documents that could change the course of battles. Every mission blurred the line between fear and faith. Evelyn often treated wounded German soldiers during her cover assignments. Some were barely old enough to shave. She bandaged their wounds, all while memorizing the insignias on their uniforms and sending that information to Allied command. It haunted her at night, the strange mix of compassion and espionage. She prayed quietly for the war to end, knowing she would keep risking her life until it did. For Alice, the hardest moments came when she heard the Gestapo trucks at night. They would stop at homes suspected of harboring resistance members. The sound of boots, doors breaking, screams, then silence. She once saw her friend and fellow agent Colette dragged into a truck, never to be seen again. Alice didn't cry that night. She simply went back to her radio and sent another message to London. She had learned that in war, grief was a luxury. Despite the danger, their missions began to make an impact. The intelligence they gathered saved Allied lives and sabotaged German supply routes. Bridges exploded in the night. Ammunition trains derailed. Enemy communication lines went dark. And always, somewhere behind those victories were women who operated in silence. They carried the war not in weapons, but in whispers. Still, the fear never left them. Claire once said in a letter home, a letter that never made it to New York, "The hardest part is not dying. It's pretending you're not alive." She burned every letter she wrote, afraid even her words could betray her. She lived with no name, no past, and no certainty of a future. By late 1944, their missions intensified. As Allied forces closed in on France, the Gestapo's hunt grew desperate. Checkpoints doubled. Informants were everywhere. The Resistance Sisters, as soldiers later called them, knew their time was short. Each night they transmitted messages under tighter windows, risking detection by German radio triangulation teams. One mistake, 1 second too long, and the trucks would come. The war had turned them into something new. Not soldiers, not spies, but survivors. They had traded their identities for the safety of others, their peace for the freedom of strangers. And yet in their hearts they carried a quiet hope that someone would remember them not as ghosts, but as women who chose courage over comfort when the world needed it most. The end of the war was near, but their story was far from over. The Gestapo was closing in. Some would make it home, some would not. But all of them would leave behind a legacy of bravery written not in medals or headlines, but in the freedom their secrets helped secure.